So now we get to garment construction. So the first part of the construction we need to do is to attach the gusset pieces to the front and back of the knicker. Now I love doing this first because within your first two seams you have attached all of your pattern pieces together, so there's no chance of you losing them. So the method I'm going to be showing you is where we have what we call a seamless gusset. So the seam, you won't be able to see the seam of the front and the back gusset. It will be all tucked inside and all neat. So traditionally that method is called the bagging out method, where the seams are inside and you can't see them. So we're going to use the bagging out method, but we're also going to use the burrito method. So the burrito method is a really simple way to do this method without getting confused. So the first thing you need to do is get your back pattern piece. So here we have our back one. You can actually start with the front or the back, it's up to you, but I tend to start with the back because it's just a tiny bit more harder because the seam is longer and slightly more curved. So if we start off with the hardest one first, then we know we've only got more easy ones to do. So we're attaching the gusset liner and the gusset outer with the back of the knicker. So before we get into it, I just want to emphasize again to make sure that your notches are all marked. If they're not, sometimes you just forget or whatever, then at this stage just mark them on. So just, yeah, all my notches are on, so that's good because we will need them when we're doing this. So take your gusset liner and place it right side up. So this is the side that's going to be touching your skin. Then take your back piece and place the back gusset seam over the back gusset seam of the liner, so like that. And now take the gusset outer, turn it around so you've got right side facing right side. So right side of your gusset outer facing the right side of your back knickers. So we're going to be joining the back gusset seam together. So this is where the notches come in really handy. So what we're doing is sandwiching the back knicker in between the two gusset pieces. So now we need to attach the gusset seam together. So because we've got our notches on, we can join our notches up first because we know that's the middle. So join your notches up first. You can do this one layer at a time if you find it easier. Let's just put a pin in. So there we go. So if we put a pin going up, so perpendicular to the seam, and then we've got that in place, and then take another pin. You can also put your notch on the other side. See, at the moment obviously I can't see my notch because it's on the underside, so you could put your notches on both sides, which really helps as well. So I've now matched the back gusset seam notch up with these notches here, and then I'm pinning those together as well, and I'm going to take that original pin out. And then you want to continue pinning the rest of the gusset seam. Now take your time with this because you're working with 3 layers together. It can be a bit tricky, it's not the easiest, and obviously with stretch fabric as well. So when you pin the edges up, you don't put the edges together like that because that is the seam allowance. That isn't the edge of the actual sew line. So you have to remember that you've got a 6mm seam allowance. So if I just use my tape measure, for instance, 6mm comes to here. So that is where we are going to start sewing. So that means we need to have our fabric matching at that point. And because it's a slightly different angle, you can see how the fabric crosses over at this point 6mm in from the edge of the gusset seam allowance. So if you pin that one in place first, and then you can bring the other layer up and pin that one as well. You can either just take that one out or put a new one in, it's up to you. So that is how your edges should look. And then do the same with the other side. So have the sharp bit of the pin facing into the garment. And then continue to pin the rest of the seam. Now, because this is a curved seam, it is a little bit trickier. So we're putting a outward curve to an inward curve here, so a concave curve here. So this one needs to be brought up. And what can often happen is that can slip too far down, and then you have a hole in your seam. So if you bring that up, so again in the middle of the two pins, and then put the pin through there. And one thing you can do to help you pin these together is just pull the seam out very slightly so it's straighter. So this can be a little bit fiddly, so don't worry about if it's taking you a bit of time. And then I would advise adding a few more pins in the middle of those pins as well. The more pins you've got in, the more the fabric's holding in place, and then it's less likely things are going to go wrong. So you've got a nice set of pins in there, and then can do the same on the other side. And there we go, that's how your gusset seam should look. Just put that pin on that side as well. Okay, so we're now at the sewing machine, and we're now going to sew the back gusset seam. So make sure you've got your stretch needle in. I've got my 75 stretch needle in. So firstly we're going to do a straight stitch. So I've got a 3 straight stitch, so it's slightly longer than normal. Remember, if you can, take your needle thread to the back. This will help you in a moment when we start to sew. And then place your seam under the presser foot. But as we went through in module 1, don't start right at the edge, so come in a few mil and then make sure you've got your thread at the back as well. So often with this seam, the under fabric can be taken under the bed of the machine. So line your foot up because we're using a 6mm seam allowance, and then start to sew. And then take your pins out as you go. It's best not to go over your pins if possible, because they are perpendicular to the seam. You can go over them, but be careful if you do, because they can still break even this way. But I always take mine out as I sew, just to make sure. So go nice and slowly. And then cut. And there we go. So if we turn that on the back, that's sewn nicely as well, and it hasn't been taken under the machine, so that's great. So we're also going to use a zigzag stitch now. It is possible just to use a straight stitch on the front and back gusset seam because the seams are going inside anyway, but to make it an extra secure seam you can then put this zigzag stitch over. So if we go to use the zigzag stitch, the inner part of my zigzag, I'm aiming for it to hit this stitch but not going inside of the stitch. Okay, there we go. That's sewn nicely. So now I'm going to take it back to the table and show you how to attach the front of the knicker. So you'll now see why this is called the burrito method. So when we attach the front knicker part, so all we need to do is, it's already started to roll for me because this fabric is so curly. So we just need to roll the back piece down like that, and then have the two gusset pieces over. So there you go, that's pretty much the burrito part, where you basically roll the fabric that's being sandwiched inside, and then we want to attach the front here. So then you need to place this inside. So we've got right side to right side here, and then we've got right side to wrong side here. So right side of the gusset liner to wrong side of the front of the knicker. And then we just do the same thing how we did the back. So we put the notches together, put the pin in, we put the pins in at the two edges, and then we continue to pin in the middle of those pins. Okay, so that's all pinned and now ready to be sewn. Okay, so now we need to sew the front seam just like we did the back seam. So one thing I wanted to mention, so it's easier to sew with the most stable fabric on top because the pressure of the foot can sometimes drag the fabric. So when I sewed the last seam, it was fine, but I sewed on this side. Now this fabric here is actually a little bit slinky, so I've actually used a bamboo and organic cotton jersey for the liner, and it is a bit slinky. And if you have trouble with sewing your seams, if you have a more stable fabric, so the more stable of my two fabrics is the cotton jersey, not the gusset liner, then try and sew with that side facing upwards because it's going to be a lot easier to sew with. Okay, so make sure you've got your needle thread to the back again, and again we're using the straight stitch. Line your foot up for a 6mm seam allowance, come in a few mil, don't start right at the edge. And then take your pins out as you go. Okay, so that's a nice 6mm seam allowance we've got there, and it's looking good the other side as well. So you might wonder, because we're not going all the way to the edge at the beginning, does that matter? well, it doesn't, not on this seam, it doesn't, because we're going to be using elastic on this edge anyway, so it doesn't matter. We don't need to make sure that that is secure all the way to the edge. So yeah, and then I'm going to do the zigzag stitch again, so another medium zigzag stitch. So again, make sure I've got my thread, pull it to the back, and when you're sewing this seam, try not to stretch anything, because it's a stretch fabric, it will want to stretch. So to have the seams lying flat, you want to try not to stretch any of the fabric, so you just want to guide it through. There we go. And that's all nicely stitched at the back as well. So the big reveal in a minute, we'll take that to the table. So if you do have long threads, if your machine doesn't automatically cut, then at this point just trim those down, because they could become annoying. So you don't have to deal with extra threads where you don't need to. So, okay, so then all you do now, pull it the right way, and voila, you have all of your pieces attached together, all of the seams nicely hidden. So your first two seams are your best two seams because you've got all of your pieces now attached together, so that's great. So the last part of doing the gusset is we want to make sure that this open part here is secured down, so that when we're doing the elastic, the two pieces don't move around. So we're going to do a basting stitch either side here. So when I said earlier about always work with the most stable fabric up, I'm going to flip this around and we're going to sew it this way. It's less likely that the foot will drag the fabric because this is a slightly less stable fabric. So if you put your pins in at the seam allowance and make sure it's all flat, you haven't got any bulges or anything, with the pins facing inwards as well. And then one pin in the middle with the two edges flush together, and then again another pin in the middle of those ones, and then another pin in one of those ones. And then turn it around and do the same on the other side. There we go, so that's all pinned and prepared for the basting. So let's take it to the machine. Okay, so now we are going to baste these two layers together. So I'm going to put my stitch length, so I've got a straight stitch, and then I'm going to put it to a 3.5 for this one. So if you try and stitch within 6mm, so I advise probably 4mm in from the edge of your fabric here, so then you're not going over the seam allowance area. So we want to stitch in the seam allowance. And then you don't have to go all the way right to the top of the seam. You can Again, start about 3mm in, and that just helps with the bulk as well. If you've got a lot of bulk going through the machine, it's more likely to cause problems. So just come in a bit and then start stitching. Now, because we're not starting at the edge of the fabric like we were before, there's not really much chance that the fabric is going to be taken down to the bed, so we didn't need to make sure that we held our thread at the back or anything. So again, remember not to stretch any of the fabric. Okay, so we have some nice basting stitches, and as you can see, I didn't start right from the top. It's not necessary to. And then do the other side, so turn the neck around, so you're starting from the opposite end that you started from before. And there we have it. So that is the 2 gussets, the gusset outer, the gusset liner attached to the back and front of the knicker.